The $10 trillion secret: how Earth's natural cycles will collapse the global power grid. Peak failure, fast rewind. The lights die mid-incision. In the tower control room, every screen freezes. Pilots call Mayday as planes divert, and an operator whispers a countdown while protection relays chatter like teeth in a cold wind. Banks lose clocks. Refineries stall. The grid fractures, city by city, minute by minute. This isn't malware. The trigger started underground centuries ago. A solar storm bent the field. Geology chose the path. Drought and heat made the steel soft. Losses climb toward 10 trillion as 3 natural cycles line up within weeks across continents. To see the countdown, we start with the map the grid quietly obeys. The grid's hidden geography, built on fault lines of nature. Look at a high-voltage map and you'll see confidence. Ruler straight lines linking cities, cables crossing water, interties stitching countries. But the grid doesn't obey planning diagrams, it obeys Earth. Geography moves first. Start with length and direction. Long AC lines behave like antennas for the slow, storm-driven electric fields induced by solar storms. They don't need lightning. They need a magnetosphere pushed hard, then a steady, quasi-DC shove along the surface. East-west corridors catch more of that push. Run them parallel to coastlines or across sedimentary basins, and the effect multiplies. Now the ground under your feet. Ancient shield rock, the Canadian Shield, the Baltic Craton, looks solid and safe. It is. High resistivity means voltage gradients build across short distances. Those gradients drive geomagnetically induced currents into friendlier conductors, transmission lines, transformer neutrals, pipelines, rails. Cross into a sedimentary basin, old seabeds, clays, water-saturated sands, and currents glide for hundreds of kilometers, pooling into the very corridors we built. Coastlines sharpen everything. Rivers feeding salty estuaries create wedges of conductivity that act like ramps. Substations love river flats, flat, accessible, cheap. That puts busbars and transformer yards on conductive belts. During big storms, those yards become funnels, soaking up current never shown on a one line. It's not a fault. It's the ground doing what it always does. The grid's synchronized heartbeat makes local mistakes contagious. In an AC zone, frequency and phase knit distant regions into one machine. Add a quasi-DC bias and transformers edge toward half-cycle saturation. Reactive power gets eaten. Harmonics bloom. Capacitor banks trip. Voltage support sags. Distance relays misjudge. And smart protection does something dumb. It trips what's healthy and leaves what's hurting. The wobble travels because economics and inertia glued everything together. Hidden conductors complicate routes. Underground telecom sheaths, long pipelines with impressed current, and rail networks create unintended DC highways. They couple substations you never meant to connect. During the severe storm in May 2024, operators across Europe saw neutral currents and harmonics spike in places that rarely see aurora. Physics didn't change, exposure did. Orientation and sighting choices made decades ago turned into single points of fragility. River crossings with parallel circuits, coastal substations beside marshes, long spans across plateaus where access is slow. In normal weather, fine. When clocks align, heat domes keeping transformers hot overnight, drought thinning hydropower and black start muscle, and a geomagnetic storm rolling in at sunset, those choices become accelerants. Continental synchrony raises the stakes. HVDC links stabilize day-to-day, but can propagate trouble if the receiving grid runs out of reactive support. The call becomes brutal: island to protect equipment and accept load loss, or stay coupled and risk a broader cascade. That decision isn't theory. It's minutes under alarms while frequencies drift and comms jitter. Now get specific. New England into the Maritimes threads between the Atlantic Shelf and Shield Rock inland, long east-west lines, estuaries at landfalls, aging transformers. Across the North Sea, a ring of interconnectors runs near shelf breaks and shallow basins, with cables sharing landfalls in estuaries like the Humber and Rhine, Meuse, Scheldt. In South Africa, interior lines cross the Karoo where resistivity flips between hard basement and layered sediments. Bad news when the auroral oval sags equatorward during a severe storm. None of this was built for a once-in-a-century space weather hit arriving on the hottest week. Protection expects clean sinusoids. GIC adds DC offset and harmonics that make good relays miscoordinate. Some trip healthy lines and slice away the safety net. Meanwhile, transformer cores push toward saturation heat fast. Dissolved gases, hydrogen, methane climb. If someone is watching online DGA, they can deload and save the tank. If not, slow damage sets a fuse that blows months later, after headlines fade and spares are still in customs. Underneath all of it, data gaps. Magnetotelluric surveys map Earth's conductivity, but many planning models still use crude one-dimensional assumptions. The 1D shortcut erases the edges that matter: buried paleo valleys filled with conductive clays, basalt flows that block current, saline aquifers tying two basins together. When storms hit, currents don't follow straight-line diagrams. They ride old seabeds, jump across pipeline bridges, and pool in estuaries. Operators learn the real map in real time. Here's the part veterans lose sleep over. We can reroute lines, add neutral blocking, and segment with HVDC, but steel and geology set the baseline. You can't move a craton. You can stop aligning your most critical assets with its easiest paths. The metronome above us primes the shove, but the burn pattern is written below us. Meanwhile, climate tightens the screws. Heat keeps transformers hot through the night. Drought drags reservoirs low, stripping hydro of its fast start muscle. Thermal plants on rivers derate under warm intake limits. Stack that with a storm at dusk, and your reactive cushion shrinks to inches. Every inch matters. So the map you need isn't just roads and rights of way. It's resistivity, salinity, buried channels, pipelines, rails, and cable landfalls. It's a living atlas that shows where the sky's push becomes a ground-level problem. Build with it, and you turn a catastrophe into a hard day. Ignore it, and the ground will finish the story the sun starts. The space weather trap, when the sun bends metal. See why a quiet field can shove steel into failure. Follow the sun's rhythm. Roughly every 11 years, solar activity swells. Active regions spit coronal mass ejections, billions of tons of magnetized plasma into space. Most miss us. The dangerous ones don't. When a CME's embedded magnetic field points south, as it hits Earth's north-pointing field, the coupling locks. Energy flows into our magnetosphere, then spills down into the ionosphere like a tide that doesn't care about borders. It's not a lightning strike, it's a slow push. Hours after launch, satellites watch solar wind speed climb and density thicken. Near Earth, the bow shock compresses. Magnetometers record the first jolt, a sudden storm commencement. Then the real work begins. As magnetic fields above us swing rapidly, Faraday's law writes their motion into electric fields on the ground. That horizontal geoelectric field is the culprit. It nudges quasi-DC currents through long conductors at the surface, transmission lines, rails, pipelines, and into transformer neutrals that were never meant to carry a steady bias. We've seen the fingerprints. In 1859, the Carrington Event drove telegraph systems without batteries, lit paper, and shocked operators. In 1921, the railroad storm burned out signal equipment and telephone exchanges. In March 1989, Hydro-Quebec collapsed in about 90 seconds after reactive power vanished, and protection tripped through a fog of harmonics. The physics didn't change across those centuries, the machines did. Modern steel is bigger, hotter, and more interconnected, so the same push finds more leverage. Inside a transformer, it's simple and unforgiving. The core is built for alternating flux. Add a DC offset from geomagnetically induced currents, and the core walks towards saturation on every half cycle. Once it saturates, magnetizing current spikes, the waveform distorts, and odd harmonics bloom. Relays expecting clean sinusoid C noise. Capacitor banks suck in harmonic current and trip. Reactive power disappears just when you need it to hold voltage. Meanwhile, the core heats, oil temperatures climb, and paper insulation ages fast. If you're watching online dissolved gas analysis, hydrogen and methane start to rise. If you're not, the damage bakes in quietly, waiting for a hot day months later to finish the job. Latitude matters, but it isn't a fence. High-latitude grids live under the auroral electrojets and take the first hit. During severe storms, the oval swells toward mid-latitudes. In May 2024, auroras showed up far south, and operators in Europe logged neutral current spikes where screens usually stay calm. The ground matters as much as the sky. Over resistive crust, cratons, granites, the same magnetic swing produces a larger geoelectric field. Over conductive basins and old seabeds, currents run farther and pool where our lines run. That's why exposure maps don't align with borders, they align with geology and orientation. Timing turns a hazard into a trap. A big CME can arrive late afternoon local time. Loads peak. Transformers are warmest. Nights during heat waves don't cool them. Reactive reserves are already thin. Add DC bias and harmonics, and you're negotiating with inches of voltage margin. At the same hour, the ionosphere misbehaves. GNSS timing jitters. Phase measurement units drop out or flip to holdover. Telecom links that carry SCADA and voice calls see congestion or odd delays. None of it is catastrophic alone. Together, it strips away clarity while the grid asks for perfect coordination. Protection hates ambiguity. Distance relays can overreach or underreach when waveforms distort. Some smart settings, tuned on clean data, make bad calls under harmonic fog, tripping healthy lines and leaving stressed assets online. SVCs and SDATCOMs hunt. Series compensators flirt with subsynchronous resonance if damping isn't right. It's choreography under stress, and the steps were written for quiet skies. Hidden conductors make the map stranger. Long pipelines with impressed current corrosion systems, rails, and telecom cable sheaths create parallel DC paths. They couple stations you never meant to connect. A pipeline running along a river basin can bridge a resistive ridge and deliver current to a yard you thought was protected by geology. During storms, those side doors matter. That's why cross-sector modeling, power, pipelines, rail, fiber, needs to sit in the same room before a storm, not during it. The magnetic field itself isn't fixed. The North Magnetic Pole has drifted towards Siberia over the past century. The South Atlantic Anomaly, a broad patch of weaker field over southern Brazil and the South Atlantic, bends satellite operations and lowers the threshold for trouble on the ground. Satellites crossing the SAA reset more often. Timing integrity gets harder during storms. Grids under or near that weak patch feel the same CME like a heavier hand, especially where heat and water stress already shaved headroom. We do have levers. Neutral blocking devices insert capacitors in transformer neutrals and choke the DC path. Series capacitors on long lines interrupt low-frequency circuits that GIC loves. Synchronous condensers and SDATCOMs can hold voltage when harmonics rise. HVDC links can act like valves if the receiving grid has reactive muscle. They can also ship instability if it doesn't, so posture matters. Real-time neutral current monitors, bushing temperature sensors, online DGA, and PMUs tuned to flag distortion turn guesswork into triage. But the first lever is respect for the clock. Space weather forecasts by hours, use them. Reconfigure flows to shorten east-west exposure. Cool what you can. Stage mobile reactive support near the yards that sit over conductive belts and estuaries. Shift interties to tighter controls. And treat the aftermath like part of the storm. Pull oil samples, watch the gases, and rotate load so tired iron gets rest before a quiet failure writes the next headline. The sun provides the shove. Rock and wire pick the path. If you read both in time, you don't beat space weather, you keep it from bending metal where it hurts most. Conductive highways underfoot. Geology that picks winners and losers. Step off the tower and into the soil, and you're stepping into a network that decides who takes the hit before a single relay moves. The geoelectric field doesn't flow evenly, it hunts for shortcuts. Geology hands it lanes, ramps, and exits. Start with contrasts. Ancient shields, granite, nice, dry, resistive bottle charge. That sounds safe until you remember Faraday's law. Rapid magnetic swings overhead map into horizontal electric fields at the surface. Over resistive crust, the same change in magnetism writes a steeper voltage gradient. That gradient pushes quasi-DC current into anything easier than rock. Steel in the ground, neutrals, long lines. Cross the contact into a sedimentary basin, clays, saline aquifers, water-saturated sands, and the field spreads. Current glides for hundreds of kilometers with less drop, pooling into the very corridors we cited for access and cost. Edges do the damage. Where hard basement meets basin fill, the geoelectric field steps, not slopes. Put a substation on that hinge and you've created a bias machine. One transformer takes the push harder than its neighbor because the ground beneath each leg isn't the same conductor. In storms, that asymmetry shows up as neutral current that refuses to match models. Coasts sharpen the picture again. A river cut through tills and sands empties into a salty estuary. Salinity wedges ride the tide inland during droughts, then retract after rains. That moving interface is a conductivity staircase, fresh to brackish to salt. Substations love river flats, wide pads, easy roads, cheap land, water for cooling. In space weather hours, they sit on the hinge, and the earth under the fence quietly becomes the lowest impedance return. The yard didn't fail. The ground picked it. We can map these highways. Magnetotellurics listens to Earth's natural hum, solar and lightning-driven, across frequencies to infer resistivity with depth. The output isn't a pretty surface map. It's a 3D picture with ridges, troughs, and buried channels that matter at grid scale. Yet planning tools often flatten this into one-dimensional layers. A 1D Earth erases the very edges that steer current. Paleovalleys filled with conductive clays, basalt sills that act like buried walls, saline aquifers that connect basins like underwater rivers. When storms land, the current follows the real geometry, not the spreadsheet. Watch how this plays out on actual corridors. New England into the Maritimes threads between shield rock inland and marine sediments along the coast. Long east-west lines run near estuaries, the Kennebec, Merrimack, Connecticut, St. John, where conductivity jumps over short distances. A strong storm drives larger geoelectric fields over the shield. Those fields dump into the coastal belt where lines, pipelines, rails, and substations cluster. Operators see repeating signatures, neutral currents rising together in stations built on old river deposits, harmonics blooming as saturation bites. Cross to the North Sea, interconnectors leave through shallow shelves armored in glacial sands and tills, then swing past shelf breaks into deeper water. Landfalls concentrate at estuaries, the Humber, Thames, Rhine, Meuse, Scheldt, alongside refineries and industrial load. Seafloor conductivity changes abruptly across those shelves and slopes. Induced fields intensify at the breaks. The man-made and natural conductors stack. Steel in the ground, cable sheaths, pipeline corridors, salty mud. During storms, they share the push whether planners talk or not. Head south to the Karoo, layered sediments over resistive basement, cut by dolerite sills that run like buried dams. A transmission line might cross 2 or 3 resistivity domains in a handful of towers. The geoelectric field doesn't smear evenly along the span, it spikes at contacts. One end of a transformer pair gets a heavier DC bias than the other. Without neutral blocking, that asymmetry fans saturation on one side first, pulling reactive power and nudging voltage down a notch at exactly the wrong time. Pipelines and rails redraw paths you didn't model. Long steel with impressed current corrosion systems is a DC-friendly conductor by design. Run a pipeline along a river basin, and you've built a quiet bridge over a resistive ridge that would have blocked current in the ground. Rails with continuous welded track and return bonds can do similar work. During the May 2024 storm, European control rooms compared notes and saw neutral surges in yards that rarely blink. The ground hadn't changed overnight. The storm simply found a cleaner route through clay belts and steel corridors that happened to be continuous. These paths breathe with seasons. Drought lifts salinity upstream, estuary wedges march inland. Groundwater tables drop, clays dry and stiffen, resistivity rises on ridges, increasing gradients. After heavy rains, fresh water flushes estuaries, conductivity steps move seaward, the bias target shifts by kilometers. Add human cycles, reservoir drawdowns, thermal plant derates on warm intakes, distribution load surges from deep irrigation pumping, and the same substation that shrugged in spring becomes a sink in late summer. So what do you move? Location first. Shift planned substations off river sediments to older bedrock or mixed tills a ridge away. The distance can be small, the effect is. Orientation next. When you rebuild, bend alignments to cut across conductivity contours instead of running with them. If you can't bend, break the DC path with series capacitors and armor the worst yards with neutral blocking so the bias can't get a foothold. Then install neutral current monitors where geology predicts spikes, coastal pads, shield edges, basin contacts. Put online dissolved gas analysis and bushing temperature sensors on the same tanks so you can translate a rising neutral into actionable heat risk. Feed magnetotelluric models into power flow tools so dispatchers can reroute around vulnerable iron during forecasted storms, and widen the room. Bring pipelines, rail, and telco into pre-storm planning so their steel isn't your surprise wire. None of this deletes geology. It stops you from aligning your most fragile steel with its easiest highways. The sun will push, the field will right, the ground will steer. The winners move their targets off the ramps before the next surge draws the map in heat and noise. Water rules everything: drought, hydropower, and thermal stress. The currents in the ground decide who gets shoved, but water decides how hard you can stand back up. The grid breathes with rivers, reservoirs, and the air's heat. When those turn against you, every other weakness gets louder. Start with the calendar nobody in a control room controls. Snowpack sets spring potential, monsoons refill or miss. If melt comes early and heat follows, hydropower peaks before demand does. By late summer, lakes sit low and warm. Turbines still spin, but head pressure falls, so each megawatt costs more water. Black start plans that assumed firm hydro become fragile options. Firm turns into maybe. Hydro is muscle, not just energy. It starts fast, stabilizes frequency, and anchors restoration. Lose that and you reach for slower, thirstier tools. Western North America felt it during the 201's megadrought. Reservoirs bled down, hydro waned, and gas turbines carried heat waves until river intakes warmed and forced derates. Plants that could have saved the evening had to throttle to avoid cooking fish and violating permits. Stability vanished 1 degree at a time. Heat changes lines too. Conductors shed heat to the air. Transformers rely on cool nights to drain oil temperatures. Under a heat dome, nights stop cooling. Morning begins hot. By late afternoon, copper is soft, windings run near thermal limits, and nameplate ratings turn into warnings. Hot steel sags inches closer to dry brush. A gust, a branch, a contact, now a corridor that's carrying the region threatens to ignite it. Water remembers politics. Upstream irrigation, downstream navigation, tribal rights, municipal intakes, flood rules written for cooler decades. Operators inherit those choices. In 2022, Sichuan sat under brutal heat dome. Hydropower that normally supplies the bulk of demand fell hard as rivers thinned. Factories shut, subway lights dimmed, and public cooling sites stretched. The grid didn't just lose megawatts, it lost the fastest stabilizer when the air turned against it. Cross the map to the Paraná Basin. Multi-year drought drops reservoirs below efficient head. Barges ride higher on shallow water, cutting fuel and coal deliveries. Thermal plants stall waiting for shipments. Diesel for backup generators gets rationed. Hospitals and water treatment plants feel it first. An outage becomes a logistics story: fuel, permits, and river drafts, not just relays and loads. Thermal discharge limits create a loop planners miss. A big river plant owns a permit tied to ambient water temperature. When the river runs hot and low, output must come down to protect ecosystems. Europe saw it in 2022. The Rhine and Garonne warmed, levels fell, and nuclear and coal units derated exactly when their inertia and reactive support were essential. The decision wasn't ideological, it was legal and physical at once. Watch how these feedbacks stack under space weather. Drought lifts salinity upriver, pushing brackish wedges deeper into estuaries. Conductivity rises under coastal substations, reshaping where geomagnetically induced currents enter the grid. The same yards sweating under peak demand quietly become better DC sinks. Nights don't cool, so transformers start the day hot. A CME arrives at dusk. Reactive margins were already thin. The DC bias nudges cores towards saturation. Harmonics kick capacitor banks. Voltages sag. None of those steps is dramatic alone. Together, they compress your options to minutes. Wildfire sits on the edge of the same loop. Stressed lines, low humidity, and wind force preemptive shutoffs. Those intentional islands keep a region from burning but cut power to phone towers and pump stations. The public sees a blackout. The control room sees triage, save the backbone to prevent a collapse, sacrifice branches to prevent a firestorm. That's a trade you make when water retreats and air runs hot. Black start turns into a water plan. If your anchor is a hydro station on a low reservoir, you've got hours of starts before head drops below safe limits. If the next anchor is a gas plant on a warm river, you need diesel for auxiliaries and intake temperatures inside the permit. Those constraints don't ease during heat waves. They tighten. There's a food chain in electricity. Cold storage protects harvests and insulin. Refrigeration dies fast when distribution feeders run hot. A city can live on bottled water for a day. It can't live without sewage pumps by day 3. Hospitals burn diesel every 24 to 72 hours. Fuel arrives by truck through intersections that need signals and payments that need networks. Drought year outages put every link on the same brittle clock. So the fixes start where the water runs. Redesign intakes for deeper, cooler draws with variable speed pumps and separate station house power from main intake power. Elevate discharge flexibility within environmental limits. Seasonal variances for restoration hours with monitoring, not blanket waivers. Upgrade hydro with modern runners and digital governors to wring controllable inertia from thin water. Stage mobile chillers and temporary cooling towers at river plants for peak weeks so D-rates don't cascade. Then reduce how much you ask from hot iron. Shade and ventilate substations. Deploy dynamic line ratings to capture real-time wind and cloud, not static worst case. Pre-stage SDATCOMs and synchronous condensers at ends of long corridors that run through heat-prone load pockets. Wire large irrigators, cold chain depots, and water plants into demand response with real teeth. Curtailment that buys megavolt ampere reactive headroom in the hour it matters. Finally, rehearse with reality. Practice rolling cuts that preserve hospitals, telecom, water intakes, and cold storage first. Align restoration paths with fuel and water logistics, not just electrical topology. When the sun shoves and the ground steers, the state of your rivers and your night air decides whether the grid bends or breaks. The wandering north, magnetic drift, and the South Atlantic anomaly. The compass we trusted doesn't sit still. Over the past century, the North Magnetic Pole slid out of the Canadian Arctic and accelerated toward Siberia. That drift quietly redraws exposure. The auroral engine follows the pole, not our borders, so belts that used to live under calmer skies now sit closer to the storm track. Operators who once watched storms like distant fireworks now see neutral currents on screens that used to be quiet. It isn't hype, it's geometry moving under our feet. Standards lag moving targets. Hazard maps built in the 199s assumed the oval's typical reach. By the 200 ones, the pole had shifted hundreds of kilometers. Protection tuned for safe mid-latitudes can find itself fighting low, slow DC bias on hot evenings when demand peaks. This is how timing becomes risk. The pole drifts, exposure expands, then a CME arrives at dusk when transformers are already warm and reactive support is thin. A small change in where the sky presses becomes a big change in what the ground absorbs. Meanwhile, there's a dent in the shield. The South Atlantic Anomaly is a wide zone of weaker geomagnetic field centered over southern Brazil and stretching into the South Atlantic towards South Africa. Satellites feel it first. As they cross, instruments glitch more often, memory bits flip, detectors saturate, and operators schedule resets. During severe storms, the radiation belts swell and those resets stack. That matters on the ground because grids ride synchronized time. GNSS clocks feed PMUs, relays, telecom, and finance. Increase timing noise at the worst hour, and coordination slips exactly when geomagnetically induced currents are pushing transformers towards saturation. Weak field overhead lowers thresholds below. With less magnetic shielding, the same solar punch maps into larger ionospheric currents and stronger ground-level geoelectric fields. Then geology picks winners and losers. Southern Brazil's grid crosses from hard shield rocks to conductive sedimentary basins and out to salty estuaries, sharp contrasts that steer induced currents into the very corridors that feed coastal load. South Africa's lines cut across the Karoo's layered sediments and resistive basement, with dolerite sills acting like buried walls. Put a weak field over those edges, add heat or drought that thins headroom, and you've stacked the deck. We should keep perspective. Not every storm is a Carrington-class event, and not every satellite hiccup becomes a blackout. But planning for yesterday's map is its own hazard. The North Pole's drift and the SAA's slow evolution change where mid-latitude really sits, and how often timing gets noisy over key grids. Waiting for a headline to update standards is how you end up explaining smoke in a transformer yard to a city that thought it was out of the aurora's reach. So what changes when you respect the wandering compass? First, you update the risk map. Feed real-time data from regional magnetic observatories into GIC models tied to three-dimensional resistivity, not one-dimensional shortcuts. Flag the substations that sit on conductivity hinges under today's auroral footprint, not last decade's. When forecasts show the oval bowing equatorward, stage neutral blocking at those yards, not just the traditional high-latitude ones. Reconfigure flows to shorten east-west exposure during the window. It's small work that buys hours when hours matter. Second, you harden time. GNSS will jitter more during storms, especially over the SAA. Layer holdover clocks with disciplined oscillators at control centers, substations, and telecom hubs. Cross-check time sources and push alerts that tell operators when PMUs are in holdover so they treat phase angles with caution. During the May 2024 storm, some control rooms filtered PMU streams dynamically and fell back to trusted SCADA for certain calls. That discipline keeps a timing problem from becoming a protection problem. Third, you choreograph DC and AC. HVDC links crossing SK-adjacent grids. Brazil's growing network, Southern African interties, can act as valves if converter stations are kept cool, and reactive support is available on the AC side. Tighten control modes when the oval sags south. Lower transfer setpoints if receiving grids show hot transformers or low VAR reserves. Converter filters and valve halls hate harmonics from stressed partners. Protect them so the link can carry stability, not import collapse. Then there's the seabed. The SAA doesn't stop at shorelines. South Atlantic subsea cables, power interconnectors to islands, and dense data trunks run near shelf breaks and estuary landfalls where induced fields intensify and anchors concentrate. In a storm, timing, noise, and data congestion meet physical choke points. Repair vessels are few and booked, permits and weather narrow windows. A single fault can throttle restoration and markets for weeks. Spread landfalls across different conductivity zones, pre-stage contracts and port priority to cut repair delays, and share status openly so grids can reroute around missing arteries before they become surprises. Finally, train for the map you have. In Brazil and South Africa, drill compound events with space, weather, heat, and water constraints in the script. Practice neutral current triggered deloading on the exact transformers that models say are now most exposed. Move mobile SDATCOMs to corridors where geology and weak field overlap. Teach dispatchers to trust the updated risk atlas over habit, even if it means uneconomic flows for a night. The North Pole will keep wandering. The South Atlantic Anomaly will keep breathing. We don't fix either. We align to them. Update the map, harden time, posture DC as a valve, destack landfalls, and rehearse the minutes that decide whether a storm becomes a story or just a loud night sky. Atmospheric whiplash, heat domes, polar surges, and peak demand. And while the atmosphere tightens the vice, heat domes settle in like lids on a pot, trapping dry air that grows meaner each day. Nights stop cooling. Transformers, which count on darkness to shed heat, wake up warm. By late afternoon, oil is hot, copper is soft, and nameplate ratings turn into cautions. Demand climbs a staircase of compressors that don't cycle off. Reserve margins evaporate. Operators watch the curve they feared, load rising, voltage support thinning, with no cool night to reset. Blocking highs bend the jet stream into long waves. The same pattern that bakes one coast can shove polar air down another. It's a two-sided hammer. Heat saturates urban cores. Weeks later, an Arctic burst slams a grid that just limped through summer. Equipment that aged under heat faces brittle cold. Steel contracts, insulators crack, and ice loads lines that sagged in July for the opposite reason. The physics flips, the stress stays. In heat, peak lands from late afternoon into evening. Solar fades as households get home and crank cooling. Gas turbines pick up the slack if fuel and cool water cooperate. Distribution substations hum under compressor-heavy, harmonic-rich load. Every brownout restart is a surge. Every surge chips away at winding life. Conservation pleas give way to surgical cuts to protect frequency. These aren't theoretical, they land on neighborhoods, not spreadsheets. Cold snaps draw a different, unforgiving shape. Electric heating surges at sunset. Motors start and stall in unheated garages. Gas systems strain, wellheads freeze, compressors stumble, pipeline pressures drop. Power plants waiting for gas sea curtailments. The coupling becomes literal. Power needs gas to run, gas needs power to move. Valves, sensors, and comms weren't tested together at -10. The spiral tightens in hours. Texas in 2021 showed the anatomy. A polar surge outran forecasts. Generation tripped on condition standards hadn't required units to survive. Gas froze at the wrong valves, power stations starved. Black start units faced icing. Load shed went wide to avoid collapse. Frequency still skated the edge. The storm didn't invent the weaknesses, it synchronized them. The fix after wasn't just weatherization, it was coordination between gas and power, with real inspections and penalties. Europe in 2022 offered the hot mirror. Heat waves stacked, rivers warmed and fell, thermal plants derated under discharge permits. Nights stayed hot, so transformers never cooled. Distribution hit thermal limits at midday, then faced a second kick at dusk. Interconnectors moved power across borders, but some receiving networks were already near voltage collapse under air conditioning load. Operators saw an ugly choice: pull ties to protect equipment and island cities, or hold and hope reactive support holds a little longer. Hospitals called. Data centers asked for exemptions. The choreography was minutes long and very public. Urban heat islands make everything worse. Concrete stores heat, rooftop condensers dump more, pole-top transformers run at the edge longer. In older housing with weak insulation and fewer options, load spikes harder longer. Equity is literally baked into feeder maps. A circuit that never broke records now scrapes thermal limits 3 nights straight. The fourth, a bushing fails and a block goes dark. Protection feels heat too. Distorted waveforms confuse relays. Capacitor banks trip on overcurrent during the worst minute, stripping the last VAR cushion. Operators flip playbooks, drop non-critical load, call large customers, reroute power flows. The reroute pushes already warm transformers into the red. You fix one pocket and set up the next. Now stack the atmosphere with the sky. A geomagnetic storm at local dusk during a heat wave meets a grid with no thermal headroom. Reactive power is already scarce. DC bias nudges cores towards saturation. Harmonics rise. A capacitor bank trips. Voltages sag across neighborhoods that were 1 degree from shedding anyway. Across the ocean, a polar outbreak does the mirror. Demand leaps, gas wanes, frequency dips, and timing jitter from the ionosphere turns precise control into guesswork right when decisions must tighten. Response windows shrink. 10-minute choices become 3-minute ones. Restoration crews swap heatstroke kits for de-icing gear in the same month. Training helps, tempo still punishes. The system wasn't built for year-round sprinting. Weatherization isn't a checklist, it's choreography. Shade and ventilate substations. Add dynamic line ratings that account for wind and sun, not just static limits. Deploy mobile and permanent reactive support at the ends of long corridors. In cold zones, insulate sensors, heat trace critical valves, and harden gas-electric handshakes. And rehearse rolling cuts that protect hospitals, telecom, water pumps, and cold storage first. Then shrink the peak. Targeted demand response for large cooling loads, pre-cooling strategies, and thermal storage in buildings shift megawatts off the cliff edge. Upgrade rooftop units with smart controls that stagger restarts after sags. Wire big irrigators and cold chain depots into programs that buy reactive headroom on the hour it matters. Pay for grid-forming inverters on solar and storage so they anchor local voltage when the main spine wobbles. Finally, plan for the whiplash itself. Specify equipment for both heat and cold tolerance. Stage spares seasonally. Align black start with water and fuel logistics in summer and with gas and icing constraints in winter. Keep holdover clocks and paper maps in trucks for the hour comms drift. When air presses down, hot or cold, the question stays simple. Do you have a cool night, a warm pipe, and a quiet sky, or none of the above? Transformers, the Achilles heel we can't replace fast. All the stress we've stacked lands on a few hulking machines that don't forgive mistakes. Large power transformers aren't off the shelf. They're bespoke cores stacked by hand, windings measured to millimeters, bushings matched to a specific yard. Lead times run a year or more even in calm markets. In a storm year, lead times slip while the list of ailing units grows. Geomagnetically induced currents don't need fireworks to hurt them. A slow DC bias walks the core toward half-cycle saturation. Magnetizing current spikes. Waveforms distort. Odd harmonics flood the bus. Capacitor banks meant to bolster voltage soak up that noise and trip, shaving away the reactive cushion that kept voltages polite. Inside the tank, oil warms, copper runs hotter, and paper insulation ages years in days. You won't always see smoke. You'll see the whisper first in dissolved gas analysis. Hydrogen, methane, ethane climbing. If someone is watching online DGA, they can back off load, kick on extra cooling, or reroute flows. If not, the injury becomes a fuse that blows months later on a normal Tuesday. Harmonics confuse protection. Distance relays can overreach or underreach when the sign turns ragged. Some smart schemes miscoordinate, tripping healthy lines and leaving stressed iron online. SVCs and SDATCOMs may hunt under distortion. Meanwhile, the transformer's neutral quietly carries DC it was never designed for, heating windings unevenly and pushing the core into a zone where losses balloon. In a heat wave, that's the worst hour to gamble. Spare programs help only at the edges. Utilities participate in consortia and keep a handful of strategic units. That works for single-digit failures spread over years. It collapses when a severe storm biases a region. Footprints don't match. The high side bushing doesn't align with the bus. The tap range is off by just enough to cause headaches. Even when close enough is acceptable, physics and permits slow the crane. Ports that can lift 400 tons are booked. Bridges on the route were never rated. Rail curves are too tight, and pilot cars are tied up on other moves. In a multi-country event, customs and export controls turn hours into weeks. Insurance isn't the cushion people think. Policies often exclude solar events or wrap them into acts of nature clauses broad enough to swallow GIC. After a near miss, underwriters raise deductibles and narrow coverage. Procurement stalls because finance wants certainty that no one can sign. A manager chooses a cheaper unit with longer lead time over a hardened one that can't be justified to a regulator until after the loss. Markets reward yesterday's calm, not tomorrow's shove. There are defenses we underuse. Neutral blocking devices, capacitors inserted in transformer neutrals, starve the DC path. Series capacitors on long lines interrupt the low-frequency circuit GIC prefers. Both require disciplined protection to avoid subsynchronous resonance, but with proper damping, they act like brakes on the bias. Synchronous condensers and SDATCOMs hold voltage when harmonics rise, buying the transformer breathing room. Real-time neutral current monitors, bushing temperature sensors, and online DGA turn a storm from guesswork into triage. During the May 2024 storm, some control rooms set neutral current thresholds that triggered controlled load shifts off specific tanks. Painful locally, life-saving for the iron. Black start depends on the right steel in the right place. After a collapse, you need particular station and auto transformers to step voltages and energize dead lines safely. If one of those anchors is degraded or was saved by emergency deloading but can't be pushed, restoration rewrites on the fly. Hydro that could have been the first drum may be thin on water. A gas plant queued next needs cold water through coolers and a healthy station transformer. Restoration becomes a hunt for healthy iron and cool sinks. Supply chains don't bend fast. Global core steel is specialized. Windings require skilled labor you can't conjure overnight. Valve-regulated pumps, high-spec bushings, and tap changers come from a handful of vendors. When a region orders at once, shops queue. The few heavy haul carriers and lift cranes are spoken for. Even packaging takes time. Shock loggers, nitrogen purges, and cradles that fit rail tolerances. Every delay ripples into a neighborhood that runs closer to the edge. There's a human rhythm under the steel. Night crews pull oil samples, clamp neutral current sensors, and thermal scan bushings. A veteran taps a tank and hears a hum he doesn't like. He calls it in. A dispatcher drops a feeder an hour earlier than planned. A hospital complains. The transformer lives to carry another week. These micro-saves don't trend on social media, they prevent headlines. So what changes the slope? Specifications first. Buy higher thermal margins, tougher paper, better cooling banks, and standardized footprints across fleets so swaps fit without welding a new yard. Pre-clear heavy haul routes and port berths. Build regional spare pools with real teeth, funded, tested, and exercised, with customs green lanes and port priority baked in. Install neutral blocking and series caps where geology and east-west orientations stack risk. Make online DGA and neutral current monitors standard, not pilots. Then change incentives. Let utilities earn on resilience guided by shared resistivity maps and GIC exposure. Lower neutral currents in target yards, fewer harmonic-driven trips, faster voltage recovery in drills. Pay for outcomes, not just hardware. And treat the aftermath as part of the storm. After each event, rotate load to rest tired iron, pull accelerated oil samples, and schedule targeted outages before a quiet failure writes its own date. We can't print transformers when the sky gets loud. We can keep the ones we have cooler, less biased, better instrumented, and easier to swap when they fail. The sun will keep pushing. The ground will keep steering. The grid bends where the steel thins. Thicken it where Earth insists on leaning. Subsea cables and choke points where currents meet currents. Follow the stress off the coast, and it dives under waves, along cables most people never think about until something snaps. They're lifelines and fault lines at once. HVDC interconnectors that balance power between countries, and dense bundles of fiber that carry markets, timing, and the calls that coordinate restoration. When currents in the sky meet currents in the sea, they converge on the same narrow corridors. Start at landfall. Interconnectors and fiber prefer estuaries and ports, easy access, gentle grades, shallow shelves. Those are exactly where conductivity jumps from river mud to saltwater. During severe geomagnetic storms, the induced geoelectric field strengthens across those steps. A long metallic path laid along a shelf edge becomes a slow receiver. It's not a lightning jolt. It's a persistent shove that seeps into ground systems and station gear at the beach. Narrow seas focus risk. The Baltic, the English Channel, the Skagerrak and Kattegat, busy waters with short spans and shared landfalls. HVDC links like BritNed, NemoLink, NordLink, and Viking knit markets and reserves on ordinary days. On the worst day, they can ferry instability as easily as megawatts. If the receiving AC grid is hot and low on reactive support, a surge, control misread, or harmonic-rich waveform pushes a converter to protect itself. Operators know the drill: tighten modes, derate transfers, or block to avoid importing a collapse. Solidarity turns into survival in minutes. The seabed itself adds a twist. Shelves break to slopes, conductivity changes fast. Induced fields intensify at those breaks, right where cables run to deeper water. And the ocean moves. Turbidity currents, underwater avalanches of silt, race down canyon heads after quakes, storms, or big river floods. In 1929, the Grand Banks slide off Newfoundland snapped multiple transatlantic cables in sequence, time-stamping the flow as it went. We route better now, bury deeper near shore, armor where anchors bite, and still accept choke points because geography leaves few choices. Asia's pinch points raise the stakes. The Taiwan Strait and Luzon Strait crowd power and data into lanes shared with fishing and shipping. The Malacca and Singapore Strait funnels anchors and trawls over a dense mesh. Most faults are accidental anchors, trawls, dredging, but the result is the same: a cut during a space weather event leaves fewer paths when timing, noise, and comms load peak. Repair ships are few, weather windows close. A single failure can linger, throttling restoration data and market signals for weeks. Cross-domain coupling shows up the moment a blackout starts. Lose a power interconnector, and you lose a pressure valve that balanced your peak. Lose a data trunk, and you lose PMU streams, SCADA backhaul, and the phone bridges that coordinate crews. GNSS clocks already jitter during storms. When traffic reroutes over congested fiber with higher latency, time sync falls back to imperfect holdovers. Finance feels it too. payments queue, fuel trades stall, and procurement of spares slows because confirmation systems hang. Inverter stations are the hinge. HVDC's DC nature helps starve GIC in the shore grid, but valve halls, filters, and control systems sit in the very estuaries where induced fields spike. They hate harmonics from a stressed AC partner. If the partner wobbles, low voltage, distorted waveforms, a tuned converter trips to save its valves. Restarting isn't a breaker flick. It's a sequence that burns minutes you don't have when frequency is skating and hospitals are calling. Insurance and security add quiet pressure. Underwriters already worry about solar event exclusions and long repair times. In the fog of a storm, accidental damage and deliberate cuts are hard to tell apart. Ports juggle berth priority. Customs and coast guards juggle permits. Even with goodwill, a cable can wait on a single document while a grid routes around a missing artery. There's a playbook that turns this from roulette into choreography. Before a forecasted storm, just stack risk at landfalls, lower HVDC transfers, switch to tighter controls, and stage crews and spares at converter yards. Increase monitoring of grounding systems where cables meet estuaries. Induced currents can sneak through bonds and screens. Coordinate with cable owners for real-time status so dispatchers can reroute flows around missing bandwidth, not discover it in the dark. Spread the pinch. Don't pile power, fiber, and pipelines into the same beachhead because it's convenient. Distribute landfalls across different conductivity zones and tide regimes. Map alternate beach sites and pre-clear permits so a temporary shore splice doesn't spend a week in paperwork. Pre-contract repair vessels with priority clauses and exercise those agreements so the first real call isn't a rehearsal. Design with the seabed's physics in mind. Cross-bond cable sheaths to manage induced voltages. Specify shore grounding that doesn't hand a DC path to the storm. Avoid sharing trench corridors for new HVDC and major data trunks at the same shelf break. In tight straits, enforce anchor-free corridors with real patrols when seas are rough and visibility is low, which is exactly when accidents rise. Finally, drill the hybrid failure. Practice a scenario where a converter trips, a nearby data trunk degrades, PMUs go into holdover, and operators must island a city while talking over scratchy backhaul. It's not dramatic on paper. It's exactly what saves hours when currents meet currents and everything funnels through the same narrow gate. The compound event, when natural cycles synchronize. It starts with a clock you can't see. A fast CME leaves an active solar region with its magnetic field oriented south. 48 hours later, near local dusk across North America and Europe, the shock front hits. Magnetometers jump with a sudden storm commencement. The auroral oval stretches equatorward. Faraday's law turns that swing into a horizontal geoelectric field that isn't dramatic to watch and is brutal to ignore. Meanwhile, the air has been working on the grid all week. A heat dome kept nights warm, transformers never cooled to baseline, reservoirs sagged after a thin spring, hydro units that usually anchor black start are rationed for head. River temperatures push thermal plants against discharge permits. Reserve margins survived on paper. In steel, the headroom is gone. At minute 5, GNSS timing starts to jitter. Not a blackout of clocks, a stagger. Some PMUs flip to holdover. HF comms fade on polar routes. Data latency creeps through fiber trunks whose landfalls sit in busy estuaries. Operators switch HVDC links to tighter control, derate transfers, and watch VAR margins like a pulse. The sky gets loud, the room gets quiet. Then the ground makes choices. East-west corridors strung across sedimentary belts see the highest induced voltages. Transformers begin to bias. Their cores walk toward half-cycle saturation. Neutral currents rise in yards perched on river flats and old seabeds. Harmonics grow teeth. One capacitor bank trips, then another, shaving away the cushion that held voltages upright. A restart surge from a cluster of air conditioners tips a city feeder into an involuntary shed. A hospital calls, the dispatcher holds its feeder and cuts elsewhere. Triage begins. Across a synchronous area, the calculus tightens. If you island now, you save iron but strand load. If you hold ties, you can share support and you can share trouble. On a link's far end, a SDATCOM starts to hunt. An operator lowers transfer setpoints. The price moves immediately, but some exchanges lag. A subsea data trunk near a crowded landfall is degraded, so confirmations queue. fuel traders wait on screens that freeze, then catch up all at once. In the South Atlantic neighborhood, the weaker field of the anomaly adds a shove. Over southern Brazil and toward South Africa, satellites crossing the zone reset more, timing margins thin. On the ground, grids under or adjacent to the weak patch feel the same CME like a heavier hand. Coastal substations near estuaries see neutral currents jump earlier. In the Karoo, a line that steps from layered sediments to resistive basement shows asymmetric bias. The station on the conductive side heats faster. Where neutral blocking was installed, the DC path starves. Where it wasn't, the tank breathes harder. Water tightens the loop. A gas plant upriver is already flirting with its thermal discharge limit. Intake temperatures force a derate just as VAR support slips. A refinery on the same river pulls back. Its hydrogen unit doesn't like flicker. Diesel deliveries for hospital generators stumble because a card network tied to a fiber route at a shared beachhead is congested. Crews switch to cash. A radio repeater on a ridge dies after a wildfire shutoff. The backup battery ran out an hour ago. A buried surprise shows its hand. A long pipeline with impressed current protection runs along a river basin, unintentionally bridging two substations over a resistive ridge. During this storm, it becomes a DC bus. Neutral currents spike on both ends. An engineer who remembers the conductivity map orders a controlled reconfiguration. One neighborhood goes dark for 2 hours. A transformer lives. 2 weeks later, the cycle rhymes in cold. Another CME takes a similar path while a different grid absorbs a polar outbreak. The equipment is older by weeks and years by aging. Electric heaters surge, gas supply falters at iced valves, compressors need power that's already scarce. A DC link trips on an AC harmonic it was tuned to reject, not absorb. Operators island deliberately, protect black start units, and call industrial customers to shed. It's inelegant and correct. Recovery isn't a headline, it's a calendar. A handful of transformers that took a quiet beating in the heat fail in the fall. DGA told the story, procurement didn't keep up. An undersea repair ship is still booked from the earlier landfall fault. Insurance cites a solar event exclusion. The replacement clock slides right. The public remembers Aurora. The crews remember serial numbers. What ties the nights together isn't a single villain. It's clocks that align. The sun provides the push. Geology writes the route. Water and air set the headroom. Steel sets the limit. Markets, timing, and logistics compress or widen the margin. When those cycles synchronize, within hours, within weeks, across continents that share wires and price signals, the grid stops behaving like a machine and starts behaving like a story with a tight third act. The fix isn't magic. It's posture before, triage during, and rest after, guided by the map that Earth, not paperwork, drew. Flashpoints and near misses, lessons from the edge. Set the clock to March 1989, minutes before dawn, when Hydro-Quebec blinked and then fell. Magnetometers screamed first. Quasi-DC currents pushed big transformers toward half-cycle saturation, reactive power evaporated, and protection, tuned for clean sinusoids, made precise mistakes. Series compensators and relays acted exactly as configured and still cascaded the province into darkness in about 90 seconds. Crews later pulled oil samples and saw the quiet burns, hydrogen and methane elevated in dissolved gas analysis. Some hardware came back, some didn't. The lesson wasn't just space weather is bad. It was that harmonics and reactive collapse saved time for no one. Elsewhere, the slow version wrote its own ledger. Finland and Sweden logged elevated neutral currents during substorms that never made prime time. Nothing exploded that night. Months later, transformers failed DGA thresholds, then failed tanks. Scotland saw the same drift. Units that looked fine under Aurora later told the truth in oil. Operators answered with continuous neutral current monitors, online DGA, and in a few exposed yards, neutral blocking devices. That shift mattered. Listen to the tank before it screams. Different trigger, same choreography. South Australia, September 2016. A deep low spun tornadoes that tore towers from paddocks. Multiple lines tripped in seconds. Wind farms, compliant with then current ride-through profiles, hit their configured limit after successive faults and disconnected. Inertia thinned to a whisper. The Hayward interconnector suddenly had to carry a state. Protection on the link did its job and tripped. Frequency went through the floor. Investigators didn't point at wind, they pointed at coordination. Firmware changed. Ride-through curves lengthened. Grid-forming inverters moved from conference slides to purchase orders. Texas, February 2021 showed winter's mirror. A polar surge outran forecasts. Gas at wellheads froze, compressors stalled, and pipeline pressures dropped just as electric heaters surged. Plants tripped on conditions standards hadn't required them to survive. Blackstart units fought ice. Load shed went wide to avoid collapse, and frequency still skated the line. The echo isn't snow, it's coupling. Power needed gas to run, gas needed power to move. The fix after 2021 wasn't just weatherization kits. It was inspections with teeth, cross-commodity drills, and reworked Blackstart assignments. Japan 2011 was born of quake and sea, not a CME, but its grid lesson rhymes. The Tohoku earthquake and tsunami erased plants and lines, carving the East into islands of power. Blackstart became an art of fragments, hydro here, a thermal plant there, governors and exciters building frequency islands before stitching them. Crews worked without perfect telemetry while nuclear units stayed cold by design. Restoration succeeded because teams had drilled for pieces, not just the whole machine humming. Zoom in on fixes that traveled. After 1989, Hydro-Quebec hardened, series capacitors, tuned protection, and expanded monitoring. Later storms hurt less. In the Nordics and the UK, online DGA and neutral current monitors caught weak tanks early. A coastal UK substation moved one transformer pad off estuary sediments onto mixed tills during a rebuild. Later storms showed neutral currents measurably lower on the relocated unit. That's Geology, a way of siting paying rent. Firmware saved a city in South Australia. A wind farm updated its fault ride-through. A year later, during a brutal front, it stayed on through a burst of faults that would have tripped it before. In Texas, a plant crew wrapped in heat traced a handful of freeze-vulnerable transmitters after 2021. The next cold snap, those units held and kept a feeder alive that served a hospital and 2 pump stations. Small, unglamorous, exactly right. Now the limits. Spare transformer pools help one-off failures, not regional attrition. Lead times stretch, footprints don't match, and a port that can lift 400 tons isn't free the day you need it. Subsea repair capacity is thin. A cable cut in a busy estuary waits on weather, permits, and a ship finishing another job. Insurance carves out solar events, slowing claims after a GIC-soaked week. Magnetotelluric maps live in silos. Oil and gas holds them, power planners guess. During the May 2024 storm, European control rooms compared notes and found neutral spikes where nobody expected them. The storm found a buried channel and a steel corridor no one had modeled together. Communications is the quiet constraint. In South Australia, protection events crowded voice channels just as SCADA flooded. In Texas, site teams relayed through patchy backhaul while driving on iced roads. In Japan, paper maps and radio discipline replaced missing layers. Across incidents, timing and bandwidth decided whether good plans moved when they mattered. So the pattern isn't mystery, it's choreography. Fast cascades when reactive support vanishes. Slow burns you can hear in oil. Protection that's perfect until the waveform is. Fuel that needs the electrons it feeds. Restoration that lives or dies on the right iron in the right place. The fixes that worked were specific. Monitors, firmware, sighting shifts, grid forming capability, real winterization, neutral blocking where geology says you're exposed, and drills that include missing comms and shaky clocks. And the meta lesson, respect the clocks and the ground. If you instrument the quiet burns, move steel off conductive hinges, practice ride through for the faults you'll actually see, and write Blackstart for fragments, near misses stay near. Ignore them, and the next flashpoint won't be a lesson. It'll be the plot. Redrawing the grid map, rebalancing geographical risk. We can't pause the sun or pave over geology, but we can stop aiming our most fragile steel at Earth's easiest induced highways. This isn't theory, it's a map edit, 1 yard moved, 1 bend added, 1 device installed, repeated until a shove becomes a sway. Start with sighting. Substations perched on river sediments and estuary flats need to migrate to higher resistivity ground. The move can be modest: a ridge a kilometer inland, a pad anchored on mixed hills instead of marine clays, a bus shifted off the salinity wedge. That relocation trims DC bias during storms, shaves neutral currents, and adds flood and corrosion resilience. During later events, operators measure the difference in amps and oil temperature, not just in comfort. Orientation is next. Long east-west corridors collect more of the slow geoelectric push. When rights-of-way are rebuilt, add north-south jogs that break induced voltage. Where geometry won't bend, install series capacitors to interrupt the low-frequency circuit GIC loves. Pair with damping and tune protection to avoid subsynchronous resonance. You're not deleting exposure, you're putting a resistor in the plot. Neutral blocking belongs where geology sharpens risk: coastal pads, shield edges, basin hinges. A capacitor in the transformer neutral chokes the DC path. Add real-time neutral current monitors on the same tanks so dispatch sees the bias fall when the storm arrives. During May 2024, yards with blocking reported lower neutral currents under similar magnetic swings. That's measurable armor, not hope. See the real ground or you guess. Integrate magnetotelluric surveys into planning tools, 3D, not 1D map buried paleo valleys, basalt sills, and saline aquifers. Share those layers with pipelines, rail, and telco so cross-domain DC paths show up before the storm. A pipeline with impressed current can quietly bridge two substations over a resistive ridge. If you don't model it, it will surprise you when neutral currents jump together. Diversify anchors, distributed energy resources, rooftop solar, community batteries, small hydro, CHP, and increasingly, grid-forming inverters. Turn critical sites into micro-islands that can ride through a regional wobble. Wire hospitals, water plants, telecom switches, refineries, and cold chain depots for islanded operation with on-site storage and black start controls. In restoration, those islands become seeds that grow back into a grid. Use HVDC as a valve, not just a hose. Point-to-point links with robust controls can segment synchronous zones and stop AC cascades at controllable seams. In storm posture, tighten modes and lower set points into weak receivers, hold transfers when reactive cushions thin. Converter filters and valve halls hate harmonics. Protect them so the link carries stability, not imports collapse. Reactive support moves thresholds. Deploy SVCs and SDATCOMs at line ends and coastal belts where harmonics bloom. Add synchronous condensers at retired thermal sites to hold voltage and spin inertia when inverters falter. Specify grid-forming capability on utility-scale solar and storage so they set voltage during faults instead of disappearing. Pay for this with real products, locational VARs, and fast frequency response, so stability isn't a volunteer job. Water-smart engineering pays twice. Redesign intakes for deeper, cooler draws with variable speed pumps and separated station power. Build in monitored, time-limited discharge variances for restoration windows so D-rates don't cascade on the worst hour. Upgrade hydro with modern runners and digital governors to squeeze controllable inertia from thin water. Stage temporary cooling, mobile towers and chillers at river plants for peak weeks so environmental compliance and grid stability coexist. To stack choke points at the shore, don't pile interconnectors, data trunks, and pipelines into the same estuary because permits are easy. Spread landfalls across different conductivity zones and tide regimes. Cross-bond cable sheaths and design shore grounds that don't hand storms a DC path. Pre-approve alternate beach sites for emergency splices with customs, port priority, and naval escorts rehearsed so a repair doesn't wait on signatures. Standardize steel. Specify interchangeable transformer footprints, bushing heights, and tap ranges across fleets. Pre-clear heavy haul routes and port berths. Fund regional spare pools with testing, nitrogen storage, and transport contracts that include green lanes through customs. After each storm, rotate load to rest tired iron, pull accelerated oil samples, and schedule targeted outages before a quiet failure writes its own date. Instrument the minutes that matter. Install neutral current monitors at predicted hot spots. Put online DGA and bushing temperature sensors on critical tanks. Tune PMUs to flag distortion and pair with holdover clocks at control centers and key yards so jitter doesn't turn into guesswork. Build dashboards that overlay real-time neutral currents on resistivity maps and pipeline routes, then practice decisions triggered by thresholds, not gut. Rewrite interconnection with storms in mind. Require harmonic tolerance and long-duration ride-through, not just millisecond faults. Certify grid-forming modes in synthetic storm tests, DC bias, distorted waveforms, and timing jitter. Publish results so dispatchers know which plants can anchor feeders when the main spine wobbles. Most of all, change incentives. Let utilities earn on resilience guided by shared conductivity maps and exposure models. Lower measured neutral currents at target yards, fewer harmonic-driven trips, faster voltage recovery in drills. Pay for outcomes, not just hardware. The sun will keep pushing. The ground will keep steering. Redrawing the map turns a planetary shove into a manageable sway, one relocated yard, one bent line, one neutral capacitor at a time. Policy, markets, and blind spots. Incentives that fail under nature. We keep saying the grid is physics, but it moves to the beat of rules and money. Those rules were written for calm skies, predictable water, and fuel that showed up. When nature leans in, the incentives lean the wrong way. Start with the rate case reflex. Regulators pressure utilities to keep bills low. Managers respond by deferring transformer replacements, stretching maintenance intervals, and selecting good enough gear. A neutral blocking device that would starve DC bias during storms shows up as a line item with no immediate payoff. It gets cut. Then a storm hits, DGA spikes, and the same device becomes the first question in a hearing. Why didn't you buy it? Insurance should soften blows. Instead, it carves out solar events and broad acts of nature. After a near miss, deductibles rise, exclusions widen, and CFOs hit pause on procurement. That adds calendar to risk. A transformer that should be on order waits for a premium quote that won't cover it anyway. When the next CME arrives, the tank on borrowed time becomes the headline. Markets pay for energy, not stability. Reactive power, inertia, fault ride-through, and islanding, the muscles that hold voltage steady and keep frequency within reach, are often unpaid or underpaid. Developers shave grid-forming controls to win bids. Interconnection rules focus on delivering megawatt-hours and passing millisecond fault tests, not riding through an hour of harmonics and DC bias. The grid gets cheaper, right up until it is. Contracts split lifelines. Gas and power live in separate playbooks with mismatched penalties. In winter, generators hoard fuel to protect bids, pipelines hold pressure to protect contracts, and neither is obligated to coordinate when wellheads freeze and compressors need power. In summer, water permits are rigid even during restoration hours. The letter of the rule protects fish and habitat, which it should, but without pre-agreed, monitored flexibility for a handful of hours, you trade an ecosystem spike for a voltage crash no one priced. Data lives in silos. Utilities install neutral current monitors, but the feeds aren't shared beyond a control room. Oil and gas companies hold detailed resistivity from magnetotelluric surveys. Power planners model a 1D Earth because it's what they can see. Pipeline teams track stray DC. Telcos guard fiber routes and landfall specifics for security. During storms, each sector watches a piece of a conductor that spans all of them. The path that matters appears only in hindsight. Permits and ports become clocks. Heavy haul routes for transformers need pre-cleared bridges, police escorts, and curfews lifted. Converter components for HVDC links trip over export controls. Cable ships queue behind fishing seasons and environmental windows. Without pre-signed waivers and green lanes, an equipment move that should take days takes weeks. Nature doesn't extend deadlines. We've watched these frictions play out. Heat waves push scarcity prices sky high, while the local price for fast VAR support stays flat because the product doesn't exist. Winter cold exposes firm gas that isn't, and curtailments cascade. Payment networks lag during data congestion, slowing fuel deliveries. A subsea cut throttles market data, and traders fly blind during hours when the grid needs dispatch to reflect physics, not stale prices. There are fixes that fit the way we actually run things. Build rate frameworks that pay for measured resilience. If a utility moves a coastal substation off estuary clay to mixed tills and installs neutral blocking, pay on outcomes: lower neutral currents during storms, fewer harmonic-driven trips, and faster voltage recovery in drills. Don't just approve hardware, reward verified performance. Stand up real products for stability. Procure locational reactive power with scarcity pricing. Pay for fast frequency response with sub-second speed and premium price grid forming capability that holds voltage during faults and harmonic fog. Add a tariff for islanding readiness tied to hospitals, water plants, telecom switches, cold chain depots, and refineries. Prove black start, rehearse, and get paid to stay ready. Rewrite interconnection for long disturbances. Require harmonic tolerance and ride through for minutes under biased, distorted waveforms. Certify grid-forming modes in testbeds that inject DC into neutrals, add odd harmonics, and jitter time sources. Publish those certifications so dispatchers know which plants can anchor a feeder when the main spine wobbles. Open the maps under guardrails. Create a protected data trust where utilities, pipelines, rail, and telcos share magnetotelluric layers, neutral current telemetry, and landfall corridors. Model cross-domain DC paths so a pipeline's impressed current system doesn't become the bus you discover during a storm. Make a GIC-aware siting plan mandatory for new yards and lines. Show the resistivity, the orientation, the blocking, or go back and move it. Pre-bake emergency authorities. Green lane customs for critical grid gear. Port priority for cable ships and heavy lifts. Time limited, monitored discharge variances for thermal plants during restoration hours. Pre-position bonded spares with standardized footprints and pre-cleared routes across borders. Drill those authorities with the same cadence as black start. Drill the market. Run compound event simulations through the exchange with degraded data, timing jitter, and a cable down. Let scarcity and stability products clear against each other under stress. Make sure price signals don't pull flows into hot transformers or weak VAR pockets because a model didn't ingest geology. Finally, fix the career math. Reward managers for moving risk before the storm, neutral caps installed, sighting shifts executed, resistivity maps integrated, even if nothing fails for 3 years. Penalize deferrals that look efficient on paper and fragile in steel. Tie executive comp to resilience metrics, measured neutral current reductions, faster post-event voltage recovery, verified islanding drills. Nature sets the clocks. Markets and rules decide whether we show up on time. Align the incentives with the map the Earth actually draws, and a storm becomes a hard night, not a lost week. The human week: food, water, heat, and hospitals. The clock starts when voltage sags and stays there. Day 1 feels manageable. Fridges hold cold if doors stay shut. Grocery freezers coast on thermal mass. Hospital generators hum, diesel tanks look full. Water towers keep pressure. Phones have battery. People ask for updates and expect fast answers. Dispatchers still have maps. Radios still have repeaters. Crews still have fuel. By day 2, the quiet failures begin. Pharmacy staff move insulin into the coldest case. Walk-in coolers drift upward a degree at a time. Store managers call clinics. Clinics call hospitals. Hospitals count diesel hours left and rerun delivery routes because one terminal went offline. A fuel depot switches to cash because payment networks hiccup. A driver cuts paper receipts and counts bills by flashlight. At a refinery, a hydrogen unit dislikes the flicker and slows, blends fall behind. This isn't drama, it's a chain tightening. Water plants pivot from continuous to batch. Pumps, coagulant feeds, ozone, UV, and sensors all want steady power. Some sites island, but chlorine valves still need telemetry. Without it, operators fall back to manual checks and conservative dosing. Boil notices go out. That assumes stoves and fuel. In apartments with electric cooktops, notices read like a dare. Sewage lift stations stall. Backflow creeps into basements that never flooded from rain. The smell arrives before the alert. Heat turns rooms into risks. Cooling centers open where generators run and staff can hold the line. They need shade, water, and security. Nurses watch for heat stroke, dehydration, and the slow slide of kidney stress. Senior centers bus residents with paper manifests because electronic records sit behind dead routers. A school gym becomes triage with folding cots and fans. Volunteers learn fast. A chair in a shaded hallway is sometimes the intervention that matters. On the cold side of the map, the same week flips the threat. Pipes freeze and burst. Heaters stall. Carbon monoxide creeps from quick fixes that weren't vented. Warming centers become shelters, blankets stack, oxygen cylinders turn into currency. Generators still care about diesel, roads care about plows need fuel, pumps at depots need power. It's the same choreography with frost on it. Telecom shrinks by the hour. Towers run on batteries, then on luck. Texts outlast calls, then fail in certain valleys. A crew hauls a mobile generator on a flatbed and chases sites one by one, guessing routes because map layers won't load. A substation trip reaches the control room through a volunteer firefighter's handheld, not SCADA. Minutes pile up because the nervous system is dull. Hospitals carry the weight. ICUs fill with heat stroke and exacerbated chronic conditions. Dialysis schedules bend, missed sessions stack risk. Respirators run, but elevators don't, and nurses climb stairs with meds and ice. Oxygen logistics tighten. Liquid oxygen deliveries depend on cryoplants that want steady power and cooled water. One cancelled trip, bridge closed, card network down ripples across wards as staff ration flow rates. Surgeons choose which cases can wait without harm and which can't. Food chains bend, then break in places. Cold storage depots hum until their tanks dip. Managers call suppliers who say the terminal is offline, but a different yard can fill. If you bring cash, exact amounts. Freezers thaw from the outside in, triage begins, hospitals and nursing homes first, shelters next, then stores. A farmer watches a season's produce sweat in a shed that's too warm. He runs a diesel pump to protect a well. The tank falls. The station on his road takes only cash. There's no change. Payments matter. ATMs need power and networks. Without them, cash becomes barter, fuel for battery packs, ice for medicine. Police mark intersections with flares and whistles. Fire stations turn into information hubs with a whiteboard and a folding table. Mutual aid networks spring up. A nurse checks on homebound patients. A hardware store owner opens the back door to hand out headlamps he saved for storm season. A restaurant cooks its freezer inventory and serves meals at noon before it spoils. Prioritization maps stop being spreadsheets and start being routes taped to truck dashboards. Keep the water intake alive. Keep the telecom switch and a handful of towers. Keep hospitals and dialysis centers. Keep the cold chain depot and one supermarket per district. Keep the fuel terminal and the bridge lifts. Everything else waits. It feels unfair because it is. That's what triage is supposed to feel like. Microgrids become anchors. A hospital campus with CHP, solar and storage islands, and pulls a feeder of clinics and shelters into its orbit. A water plant with a dedicated feeder and a battery keeps treatment steady. A telecom hub on a microgrid keeps timing clean for a patch of the city. These islands don't save everyone. They buy hours. Hours change outcomes. The human week teaches a blunt lesson. Planning that ends at the substation fence isn't planning. Black start that doesn't include diesel schedules, oxygen delivery windows, and paper maps is a wish. Communities that rehearse cooling and warming sites, identify cold chain nodes, and pre-wire critical buildings for islanding by days, not hours. The grid is physics. Survival is groceries, water, meds, and a generator that didn't run dry on day 3. The playbook: early signals, triage, and rapid hardening. Start with minutes you can buy. When space weather alerts flag a southward IMF, shift HVDC to tighter modes, lower transfers, and pre-stage islanding. Bring SDATCOMs and synchronous condensers online early. Pause capacitor banks at yards already showing harmonics. Watch neutral current monitors. When thresholds rise, deload hot transformers and reroute flows off long east-west corridors. Switch PMUs to trusted time sources and mark holdover. Protect lifelines first. Lock feeders for water intakes, hospitals, telecom switches, and cold chain depots. Stagger large pumps, pre-cool buildings, throttle discretionary cooling. Cut non-critical loads surgically to hold frequency and VAR margins. Harden on the fly. Dispatch mobile chillers to river plants, deploy temporary cooling towers, stage diesel for plant auxiliaries and tower sites. Move mobile SDATCOMs to geology hinges. Shift interconnector posture to valve, not hose. After the surge, rest the iron. Rotate load, pull accelerated oil samples, read online DGA, schedule targeted outages, and replace bushings that ran hot. Update the resistivity-informed risk map from what the storm revealed. Resolution and broader meaning. Nature sets the clocks. Geology, water, and steel decide the bill. For the on-the-ground hardening checklist and high-risk corridors, subscribe and watch the next chapter. Share this with the person responsible for your hospital, plant, or city. Those minutes are theirs to buy.